The rain had finally stopped after 3 days of constant downpour, and Captain Lisa Torres decided this was the perfect evening to treat herself. After 8 months deployed overseas, she was finally back home with 2 weeks of well-deserved leave. The promotion ceremony had been that morning, and the new captain's bars on her dress uniform still felt surreal. She'd worked 15 years for this moment, starting as a young private fresh out of high school. Lisa stood in front of her apartment mirror, adjusting the elegant navy blue dress she'd bought months ago, but never had the chance to wear. The fabric felt foreign against her skin after so many months in combat boots and camouflage. She smiled at her reflection, noting how the dress brought out her eyes and made her feel feminine again after spending so long in a male-dominated environment, where she had to be tougher than anyone else just to earn respect. The restaurant she'd chosen wasn't random. Romano's had been her dream destination since she was a teenager, working double shifts at a fast food place to help her mother pay rent. Back then, she'd walk past the elegant establishment on her way home from work, watching well-dressed couples through the large windows, wondering what it would feel like to belong in such a place. Tonight she finally could afford it, and more importantly, she'd earned it. The valet parking attendant smiled warmly as she handed over her keys to the modest sedan she'd bought used 3 years ago. It wasn't flashy, but it was hers, paid for, with her own military salary. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was everything she'd imagined. Soft jazz music played in the background, and the lighting was dim and romantic. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight on every table, and the servers moved with practiced elegance. The hostess, a young woman with kind eyes, led her to a table by the window. Lisa had specifically requested this spot when making the reservation, wanting to watch the city lights come alive as darkness fell. She'd spent too many nights in desert compounds staring at nothing but sand and stars. The urban landscape felt like luxury. As she settled into the plush chair, Lisa noticed the other diners. A couple in their 60s celebrating what appeared to be an anniversary, sharing quiet conversation over wine. A business dinner in progress at a corner table, where 3 men in expensive suits discussed contracts over appetizers. 2 women her age laughing over dessert, probably celebrating a promotion or birthday. Everyone looked relaxed and happy. Exactly the kind of peaceful evening she'd dreamed about during those long nights on base. The server approached with a genuine smile. Lisa ordered a glass of red wine, something she hadn't enjoyed in months, and took her time studying the menu. Everything sounded incredible after months of military rations and mess hall food. She finally decided on the salmon with herbs, a dish that cost more than she used to spend on groceries for a week when she was starting out in the Army. While waiting for her meal, Lisa pulled out her tablet to review some personal documents she'd been meaning to organize. Her deployment bonus had come through, and she wanted to plan how to use it wisely. Part of it would go toward helping her younger brother with college expenses, and she was considering investing the rest. The military had taught her the importance of financial planning, and she was determined to build a secure future. She made notes on the tablet, occasionally sipping her wine and watching the street outside. The rain had left everything looking clean and fresh, and people were starting to venture out again. A young couple walked hand in hand past the window, and Lisa felt a pang of loneliness. Dating had been nearly impossible with her deployment schedule, but maybe now that she was promoted and had more stability, she could think about building a personal life. The salmon arrived perfectly cooked, and Lisa savored every bite. She'd forgotten how good real food could taste. Between bites, she continued working on her tablet, reviewing investment options and making lists of goals for her leave time. She wanted to visit her mother, who lived 3 hours away, and had been so proud when Lisa called about the promotion that she'd cried on the phone. Other diners occasionally glanced her way, and Lisa felt confident and comfortable. She belonged here now. The teenage girl who used to press her face against these windows while walking home from her minimum wage job had become a decorated officer who could afford to dine wherever she chose. The thought made her smile as she took another sip of wine. 3. Evening was perfect until she noticed a man at the bar who seemed to be watching her. He wasn't being obvious about it, but Lisa's military training had taught her to be aware of her surroundings. The man was older, maybe in his 40s, with graying hair and a serious expression. He kept glancing in her direction while talking to the bartender. Lisa tried to ignore him and focus on her meal, but something about his attention made her uncomfortable. She'd dealt with unwanted male attention before, both in and out of the military, but this felt different. The man wasn't looking at her the way men usually did when they were interested. His expression was suspicious, almost hostile. She decided to finish her meal quickly and leave. The evening had been perfect, and she didn't want some stranger's weird behavior to ruin it. Lisa paid her bill, leaving a generous tip for the excellent service, and gathered her things. As she stood to leave, she noticed the man at the bar was no longer there. Outside, the cool evening air felt refreshing after the warmth of the restaurant. Lisa waited for the valet to bring her car, feeling satisfied with the evening despite the uncomfortable ending. She'd proven to herself that she could enjoy the finer things in life, that all her hard work and sacrifice had been worth it. The valet returned with her keys, and Lisa tipped him before getting into her car. As she drove home through the quiet streets, she thought about calling her mother to share details about the evening. Her mom would want to hear about every dish, every detail of the restaurant she'd talked about for so many years. Lisa was thinking about what to do with the rest of her evening when she noticed a police car behind her. The officer wasn't following too closely, and Lisa wasn't speeding, so she didn't think much of it. But as she turned toward her apartment complex, the police car followed. When she pulled into her parking space, the officer parked nearby and got out. The man walking toward her car was the same one who had been watching her in the restaurant. Lisa's heart began to race as she realized this was no coincidence. The peaceful evening she'd worked so hard to earn was about to become something very different, and she had no idea why. Lisa sat in her car for a moment, watching through her rearview mirror as the police officer approached. Her military training kicked in automatically. Stay calm, assess the situation, and respond appropriately. She rolled down her window halfway and kept her hands visible on the steering wheel, just as she'd been taught during countless security briefings. The officer stopped beside her car, and Lisa could see his name tag read, Officer Reynolds. He was the same man from the restaurant, no doubt about it. His face looked stern and unfriendly, nothing like the professional courtesy she'd expected from a traffic stop. But this wasn't a traffic stop, was it? She hadn't been speeding or braking. Any laws? Step out of the vehicle, Reynolds said without any greeting or explanation. His tone was sharp and commanding, but Lisa noticed something else underneath. A kind of suspicion that seemed personal. Is there a problem, officer? Lisa asked politely, still keeping her hands where he could see them. I wasn't speeding, and my registration is current. I said step out of the vehicle, Reynolds repeated, this time louder. Don't make me ask again. Lisa felt her heart rate increase, but she complied. She slowly opened her car door and stepped out, making sure to move carefully and keep her hands visible. Years of military discipline had taught her to follow orders, but something about this situation felt wrong. Very wrong. What's in the bag? Reynolds pointed to her small purse. Just my wallet, keys, and phone, Lisa replied. The usual things. Empty it on the hood of your car. Lisa hesitated. This was definitely not a normal traffic stop. Officer, Reynolds, can you please tell me what this is about? I haven't done anything wrong. The officer's eyes narrowed when she used his name. How do you know my name? It's on your name tag, Lisa said, confused by the question. Reynolds looked down at his uniform, then back at her with even more suspicion. You were watching me at the restaurant, weren't you? Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. This was about the restaurant. You were watching me, she said carefully. I noticed you staring at me while I was having dinner. Don't turn this around, Reynolds snapped. I got a call about suspicious activity at Romano's. Someone matching your description was acting strange, taking notes, looking like she was planning something. Planning something? Lisa couldn't hide her shock. I was having dinner and organizing some personal paperwork on my tablet. What's suspicious about that? A young woman, dining, alone, taking detailed notes, checking her phone constantly. Reynolds counted off on his fingers like he was presenting evidence. The caller said you looked out of place. Lisa felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew exactly what looked out of place meant, and it had nothing to do with her behavior. "I was celebrating a promotion," she said evenly. "I had every right to be there." "Promotion to what?" Reynolds asked with obvious disbelief. "I'm a captain in the United States Army," Lisa said, letting her military bearing show through her voice. Reynolds actually laughed, a harsh sound that made Lisa's hands clench into fists. "Right. And I'm a 4-star general. You don't look like any soldier I've ever seen." "What exactly does a soldier look like?" Lisa asked, her voice getting colder. "Don't get smart with me," Reynolds warned. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know trouble when I see it." Lisa realized that nothing she said was going to change this man's mind. He'd decided she was suspicious the moment he saw her in that restaurant, probably the moment she walked through the door. Her elegant dress, her confident posture, her presence in an upscale establishment, all of it had marked her as someone who didn't belong in his narrow view of the world. "I'd like to call someone," Lisa said. "You're not under arrest," Reynolds replied. "Yet. But I need to search your vehicle." "Do you have a warrant?" "I don't need a warrant if I have reasonable suspicion." "Reasonable suspicion of what, exactly?" Lisa pressed. "Eating dinner while black?" The words hung in the air between them, and Lisa immediately regretted saying them. Not because they weren't true, but because she could see Reynolds' face change. The suspicion turned to anger, and she realized she'd just made the situation much worse. "Don't play the race card with me," Reynolds said, his voice low and dangerous. "I treat everyone the same." But Lisa could see that wasn't true. She'd spent enough time in the military to recognize prejudice when she saw it. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her, the immediate assumption that she was lying about being a soldier, it all painted a clear picture. "Look," Lisa said, trying a different approach. "I have my military ID in my wallet. I can show you—" "Keep your hands where I can see them," Reynolds interrupted, his hand moving toward his weapon. "Belt." Lisa froze. The gesture was small, but she recognized it immediately. She'd seen soldiers make the same movement when they felt threatened. But she wasn't a threat. She was a decorated officer who'd served her country with honor, standing in her own apartment, complex parking lot after enjoying a nice dinner. "Officer Reynolds," she said very carefully, "I'm not reaching for anything. I'm just trying to explain who I am." "I know exactly who you are," Reynolds said. "You're someone who thinks she can come into a nice restaurant and case the joint, then lie to a police officer when she gets caught." "Case the joint?" Lisa repeated. "Do you hear yourself? I was taking notes about my investment portfolio." "Sure you were." Other residents of the apartment complex were starting to notice the commotion. Lisa could see lights coming on in windows, and a few people had stepped out onto their balconies to watch. She felt embarrassed and angry, but also increasingly worried. This officer seemed determined to escalate the situation no matter what she said or did. Reynolds radioed for backup, though Lisa couldn't understand why. She was cooperating completely, hadn't resisted or argued beyond asking reasonable questions. She stood quietly with her hands visible, trying to project calm even though her heart was racing. "You know what I think?" Reynolds said while they waited. "I think you're exactly the kind of person who sees a nice place like Romano's and thinks, you deserve to be there. But when working people like me try to keep the community safe, you want to cry discrimination." Lisa stared at him in disbelief. Working people? She'd been working since she was 16 years old. She'd earned every dollar she'd spent at that restaurant through years of sacrifice and service. But she could see that none of that mattered to this man. He'd already decided who she was and what she represented. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, and Lisa realized this was about to get much worse before it got better. She thought about her mother, who would be expecting a happy phone call about her celebration dinner. She thought about her fellow soldiers who trusted her to lead them with honor and dignity. Most of all, she thought about how quickly a perfect evening had turned into a nightmare, and how powerless she felt to stop it. 2 police cars pulled into the apartment complex parking lot, their blue and red lights painting everything in harsh, flashing colors. Lisa watched as 4 more officers got out of their vehicles, and her stomach dropped. What had started as one man's suspicious behavior was now becoming a full-scale incident, and she still had no idea what she was supposed to have done wrong. The backup officers approached cautiously, and Lisa could see them looking between her and Reynolds, trying to figure out what was happening. One of them, a sergeant based on his stripes, walked over to Reynolds first. "What's the situation, Reynolds?" the sergeant asked. "Got a call about suspicious activity at Romano's restaurant," Reynolds explained, his voice carrying that same tone of certainty that had been bothering Lisa since this started. This individual was taking detailed notes, acting nervous. Looked like she was planning something. When I approached her here, she became argumentative and tried to distract me with false claims. Lisa felt her jaw drop. False claims? She hadn't made any claims yet because Reynolds had refused to listen to anything she tried to say. And argumentative. She'd been nothing but polite and cooperative, even when he'd been treating her like a criminal for no reason. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, turning to Lisa, "can you tell me what happened from your perspective?" Finally, someone willing to listen. Lisa took a breath and tried to organize her thoughts. "I was having dinner at Romano's to celebrate a promotion. I was working on some personal financial planning on my tablet while I ate. Officer Reynolds was watching me from the bar, which made me uncomfortable, so I finished my meal and left. When I got home, he followed me and demanded I get out of my car." "She's lying," Reynolds interrupted. "She was clearly casing the restaurant. The way she was positioned, the notes she was taking, checking her phone constantly. Classic surveillance behavior." "I wasn't checking my phone constantly," Lisa said, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. "I was using my tablet to review investment options with my deployment bonus." "Deployment bonus?" the sergeant asked, his eyebrows raising slightly. "I'm Captain Lisa Torres, United States Army," Lisa said clearly. "I just returned from an 8-month deployment and was promoted to captain this morning. The dinner was my way of celebrating." Reynolds made that same harsh laughing sound from before. "She's been claiming to be a soldier since I first talked to her. Probably thinks it'll get her out of trouble." The sergeant looked between them, and Lisa could see him trying to process the situation. "Ma'am, do you have any identification that would support that?" "My military ID is in my wallet," Lisa said, "but Officer Reynolds told me to keep my hands visible and not reach for anything." "It's okay," the sergeant said. "Slowly reach for your wallet and show me the ID." Lisa carefully reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet. Her military ID was right behind her driver's license, and she handed it to the sergeant. He examined it carefully, checking the photo against her face, reading the information printed on the card. His expression changed completely. "Captain Torres," he said, his voice now showing the respect her rank deserved. "I apologize for this confusion." But Reynolds wasn't backing down. "IDs can be faked," he said stubbornly. "Anyone can get a fake military ID made." The sergeant looked at Reynolds like he'd lost his mind. "Reynolds, this is clearly legitimate, and even if we had doubts, we could verify it with a simple phone call." "She was acting suspicious," Reynolds insisted. "Taking notes, watching people, sitting alone in an expensive restaurant. Something was off about the whole situation." Lisa finally understood what was really happening here. It wasn't about notes or suspicious behavior. It was about her being somewhere that Reynolds thought she didn't belong. A young black woman in an upscale restaurant, dressed nicely, carrying herself with confidence. That was what had triggered his suspicion. "Officer Reynolds," she said, her military training helping her keep her voice steady and professional. "I earned the right to eat at that restaurant. I've served my country for 15 years, been deployed to combat zones, and just received a promotion that I worked incredibly hard for. I wasn't casing anything, I was celebrating." More residents had come out to watch now, and Lisa could see people recording with their phones. The flashing police lights and the growing crowd were turning her quiet apartment complex into a spectacle. She thought about her neighbors, many of whom she barely knew, watching her be treated like a criminal in her own home. Reynolds seemed to realize he was losing ground, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. I don't care what rank she claims to have, he said loudly. I know what I saw and I know suspicious behavior when I see it. What exactly did you see? The sergeant asked, and Lisa could hear the patience wearing thin in his voice. A person who didn't belong. Acting nervous, taking notes about the layout of an upscale establishment, Reynolds replied. Notes about the layout? Lisa couldn't stay quiet anymore. I was reviewing my investment portfolio. I was making notes about stock options and retirement planning. I can show you exactly what I was writing if you'd like. The sergeant held up a hand. That won't be necessary, Captain. He turned to Reynolds with a look that made it clear this conversation was over. Reynolds, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. But Reynolds wasn't finished. As Lisa reached for her wallet to put her ID away, he suddenly tensed up. She's reaching for something, he shouted. Everything happened in slow motion after that. Lisa saw Reynolds' hand move to his weapon, and her military training kicked in immediately. She froze completely, her hand still visible, the wallet still in her grip. The other officers turned to look, confusion on their faces. I'm putting my ID away, Lisa said very clearly, not moving a muscle. My wallet is in my hand and I'm putting it back in my purse. Drop the wallet, Reynolds yelled. And to Lisa's horror, she heard the sound of his weapon being drawn. The parking lot went dead silent except for the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Lisa could see the other officers looking shocked, and she realized that even they thought Reynolds had gone too far. But none of that mattered when there was a gun pointed at her. Officer, I'm complying, Lisa said, using the calm, authoritative voice she'd learned to use in crisis situations during her military service. I'm going to slowly place my wallet on the ground. She moved with deliberate, careful motions, placing the wallet on the asphalt and then raising her hands above her head. The whole time she kept eye contact with Reynolds, trying to project calm and control even though inside she was terrified. This is insane, she heard one of the other officers mutter. The sergeant stepped forward. Reynolds, lower your weapon, now. She could have anything in that purse, Reynolds said, but Lisa could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice for the first time. She's a decorated military officer, the sergeant said firmly. Lower your weapon immediately. Lisa stood perfectly still with her hands raised, acutely aware that her peaceful celebration dinner had somehow led to this moment, standing in her own parking lot with a police officer's gun pointed at her, surrounded by neighbors recording everything on their phones. She thought about all, the times she'd faced danger during her deployment, and how ironic it was that the most scared she'd ever been was right here at home. Time seemed to freeze as Lisa stood with her hands raised, looking down the barrel of Officer Reynolds' service weapon. The flashing police lights made everything feel surreal, like she was trapped in a nightmare that kept getting worse. She could hear people gasping from the apartment balconies above, and the soft sound of cell phone cameras recording every second of this insanity. Reynolds, I'm ordering you to lower your weapon right now, Sergeant Martinez said, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years on the force. He stepped closer to Reynolds, positioning himself where he could intervene if necessary. She could be reaching for anything, Reynolds said, but his voice was shaking now. Even he seemed to realize how far this had gone, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. Lisa kept her military composure, speaking in the clear, calm voice she'd used to give orders under fire. Officer Reynolds, I am Captain Lisa Torres, United States Army. I am unarmed, I am complying with all instructions, and I am not a threat to anyone here. One of the other officers, a young woman who looked like she'd only been on the force for a few years, stepped forward. Sarge, I've got everything on my body camera. This whole interaction has been recorded. Lisa felt a small surge of hope. Evidence. In the military, everything was documented, and she knew that having this on camera might be the only thing that would protect her later. She could already imagine trying to explain to her commanding officer how she'd ended up with a police gun pointed at her after a celebration dinner. Reynolds, Sergeant Martinez said again, you have 3 seconds to lower that weapon or I'm going to assume you're having some kind of breakdown and call for medical assistance. That seemed to get through to Reynolds finally. The idea of being declared mentally unfit for duty in front of his colleagues was apparently worse than admitting he'd made a mistake. Slowly, reluctantly, He lowered his gun and holstered it. Lisa didn't lower her hands immediately. She'd been trained never to assume a threat was over until someone in authority told her it was safe. "Sergeant, may I lower my hands?" she asked. "Yes, Captain. You can lower your hands. And I want to apologize on behalf of the department for what just happened here." As Lisa lowered her arms, she felt them shaking slightly from the adrenaline. She'd been in actual combat situations that felt less dangerous than this encounter in her own parking lot. At least in the military, everyone knew the rules. Here she'd been dealing with someone who seemed to make up rules as he went along. Residents were starting to come down from their apartments now, drawn by the commotion. Lisa recognized Mrs. Chen from the apartment next to hers, and Tom from across the hall. These were people she said hello to in the hallway, people who knew her as the quiet military woman who kept to herself and always held the elevator door. Now they were seeing her treated like a dangerous criminal. "Ma'am, I think we need to have a serious conversation about what happened here tonight," Sergeant Martinez said. He was looking at Reynolds with disgust, and Lisa could tell this wasn't the first time the officer had caused problems. "I'd appreciate that," Lisa said. "But first, can someone please explain to me what law I'm supposed to have broken? Because I've been asking that question for 30 minutes and I still don't have an answer." Reynolds opened his mouth to respond, but Martinez cut him off with a sharp look. "There is no law you've broken, Captain. Someone called in a complaint about suspicious activity at Romano's restaurant, but based on what I'm hearing, that complaint was completely unfounded." "What exactly did the caller say?" Lisa asked. Martinez looked uncomfortable. "The caller reported seeing a young black woman acting nervous, taking notes, and not fitting in with the other customers." The words hung in the air like a slap. Lisa had suspected this was about race from the beginning, but hearing it stated so plainly still hurt. She thought about all the years she'd spent proving herself in the military, earning respect through hard work and dedication, only to have it all mean nothing to someone who decided she didn't belong in a nice restaurant. "And that's grounds for drawing a weapon on someone?" Lisa asked, looking directly at Reynolds. Reynolds finally spoke up, but his voice had lost all its earlier aggression. "I thought, when you reached for your wallet—" "I was putting away my military ID at the sergeant's instruction," Lisa said. "The same ID that proves I've spent 15 years serving the country that gives you the right to carry that gun. More." Police cars were arriving now, including what looked like a supervisor's vehicle. Lisa could see this was about to become a much bigger situation. Word was probably already spreading through the department about an officer drawing his weapon on a military captain in a routine encounter. A tall man in a lieutenant's uniform got out of the supervisor car and walked over to Martinez. They spoke, in low voices for a moment, and Lisa could see the lieutenant's expression growing more and more serious as he listened to the report. "Captain Torres," the lieutenant said, approaching her with obvious respect. "I'm Lieutenant Johnson. I understand there's been a serious incident here tonight, and I want to personally apologize for what you've experienced." "Thank you, Lieutenant. I just want to understand how having dinner and going home turned into having a gun pointed at me." Lieutenant Johnson looked at Reynolds with the kind of expression Lisa had seen commanding officers use when they were about to end someone's career. "Officer Reynolds will be placed on administrative leave immediately, while we conduct a full investigation. This kind of behavior is completely unacceptable." "Administrative leave?" Reynolds protested. "I was responding to a legitimate complaint. You drew your weapon on an unarmed military officer who was complying with all instructions," Johnson replied coldly. "There is nothing legitimate about that response." Lisa watched Reynolds' face change as the reality of his situation hit him. He'd let his prejudices and his pride lead him into a career-ending mistake, and now there was no way to take it back. Part of her felt satisfied that he was finally facing consequences, but mostly she just felt tired. "Captain, we're going to need a full statement from you," Lieutenant Johnson said. "And I want you to know that the department will be conducting a thorough review of this incident. We'll also be looking into the original complaint to determine if it was made in good faith." Lisa nodded. She wanted answers too. Who had called the police on her for having dinner? What had they really seen that seemed so threatening? She thought. About the other diners at Romano's, wondering which one of them had looked at her and decided she was dangerous. Will there be any charges filed? Lisa asked. Against you? Absolutely not. You've done nothing wrong, Johnson replied. As for Officer Reynolds, that will depend on what our investigation finds, but I can tell you that drawing a weapon without justification is a serious matter. The crowd of residents was growing larger, and Lisa realized that by tomorrow morning, everyone in the complex would know about this incident. She thought about facing her neighbors in the hallway, wondering what they would think. Would they see her differently now? Would they always remember her as the woman who had police cars in the parking lot? But as she looked around at the faces watching from the balconies and sidewalks, she didn't see judgment. She saw concern, anger on her behalf, and something else: respect. These people had watched her handle an impossible situation with dignity and grace, and they could see exactly what had really happened here. The truth was finally coming out, but Lisa knew this was just the beginning of a much longer fight for justice. The next morning, Lisa woke up to her phone buzzing constantly with notifications. She'd barely slept, replaying the events of the previous night over and over in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Reynolds's face and the barrel of his gun pointed at her. She'd faced enemy fire overseas, but somehow this felt different, more personal, more violating. When she finally checked her phone, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Videos of the incident were everywhere. Social media was exploding, with clips filmed by her neighbors, showing Reynolds drawing his weapon on her while she stood calmly with her hands raised. The hashtags were already trending, and news outlets were picking up the story. Her mother called first, crying and asking if she was okay. Word had spread fast in their hometown, and people who'd known Lisa since she was a child were sharing the videos, outraged that this had happened to their local hero. Her little brother texted from college saying his entire dorm was talking about it and asking if she needed anything. By noon, Lisa's apartment complex parking lot was full of news vans. Reporters were trying to interview anyone who would talk to them, and Lisa could see camera crews setting up equipment. She stayed inside, not ready to face the media attention yet. She needed time to process what had happened and figure out what she wanted to say. Lieutenant Johnson called her around 2 o'clock with an update. Captain Torres, I wanted to let you know that Officer Reynolds has been officially suspended, without pay pending our investigation. We've also started looking into the person who made the original complaint. What did you find? Lisa asked. The call came from someone named Patricia Whitman. She was dining at Romano's last night and called in what she described as suspicious activity. But when we interviewed her this morning, her story didn't add up. She admitted she never actually saw you do anything threatening. She just felt you didn't belong in that restaurant. Lisa felt anger rise in her chest. A woman she'd never even noticed had looked at her and decided she was dangerous simply for existing in a space that woman thought was too good for her. One phone call based on pure prejudice had nearly ruined her life. Will there be any consequences for false reporting? Lisa asked. We're looking into that. But right now, our focus is on Reynolds's actions. Drawing a weapon on an unarmed civilian, based on such a flimsy complaint, shows a serious lack of judgment and possible bias issues. The investigation moved quickly. By the end of the week, body camera footage from all the officers had been reviewed, witness statements had been taken, and Reynolds's personnel file had been thoroughly examined. What they found wasn't pretty. This wasn't his first incident involving questionable treatment of minorities. There had been complaints before, but they'd been dismissed or resulted in minor disciplinary action. The police chief held a press conference announcing that Reynolds had been terminated immediately. The behavior displayed in this incident does not represent the values of our department, Chief Williams said. We have zero tolerance for officers who abuse their authority or treat citizens differently based on race. Lisa watched the press conference from her apartment, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Reynolds had lost his job, but she knew this was about more than one bad cop. It was about a system that had allowed his behavior to continue unchecked until it was caught on camera and went viral. Romano's restaurant called her personally to apologize and invite her back for a complimentary meal. The manager, Elena Rodriguez, was horrified that a customer had been harassed simply for dining there. "We've banned the woman who made the false complaint," she told Lisa. "And we're implementing new staff training to make sure all our guests feel welcome and safe." The story kept growing. National news picked it up, and suddenly Lisa found herself being called a symbol of dignity under pressure. Military publications wrote articles about how her composure and professionalism had protected her during a dangerous situation. Civil rights organizations reached out, wanting her to speak at events. But the moment that meant the most to Lisa came when she finally returned to Romano's 2 weeks later. As she walked through the door, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Other diners stood up and clapped for her. The staff came out from the kitchen to greet her, and manager Rodriguez personally escorted her to the same table by the window where this had all started. "You belong here," Rodriguez said simply. "You've always belonged here." Lisa ordered the same salmon dinner she'd had that night, and this time she was able to enjoy every bite without anyone questioning her right to be there. As she ate, several other diners stopped by her table to express their support and share their own stories of being judged or discriminated against. A month later, the police department announced major changes in their training and complaint procedures. Reynolds' case had exposed serious problems in how bias incidents were handled, and the department was implementing new protocols to prevent similar situations. All officers would receive enhanced bias training, and any complaint involving the drawing of a weapon would trigger an automatic investigation by outside reviewers. Lisa decided to use her experience to create positive change. She started speaking at police academies about the importance of treating all citizens with respect, regardless of how they look or where they come from. She told her story not to attack law enforcement, but to help good officers understand the impact their actions can have on people's lives. The civil lawsuit against the city was settled quickly. Lisa donated most of the money to organizations that provide legal assistance to people who face police misconduct, but don't have the resources to fight back. She kept thinking about how different this might have ended if she hadn't been an educated military officer who knew her rights and had the confidence to assert them. Reynolds tried to appeal his termination, claiming he'd been unfairly targeted because of media pressure. The appeal was denied. His actions were ruled to be a clear violation of department policy and his oath as a police officer. He was also charged with official misconduct and abuse of authority, charges that would make it nearly impossible for him to work in law enforcement anywhere else. 6 months later, Lisa was promoted again, this time to major. At her promotion ceremony, her commanding officer mentioned how her grace under pressure during the restaurant incident had brought honor to the military. "Major Torres showed us what it means to represent our values even in the most difficult circumstances," he said. As Lisa looked out at the audience of fellow soldiers and family members, she thought about how much had changed since that night at Romano's. One woman's prejudice and one officer's bias had tried to make her feel small and unwelcome in her own community. Instead, the experience had shown her how many people were willing to stand up for what's right when they witnessed injustice. Kyakukar, teenager who used to press her face against Romano's windows, dreaming of the day she could afford to eat there, had become a woman who not only belonged in that restaurant, but had helped make it a more welcoming place for everyone. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in your own neighborhood, standing up for the simple right to be treated with dignity and respect. And sometimes, when you stand firm and refuse to let others define your worth, you discover that you're stronger than you ever knew, and that your voice can help change the world for the better.